thank the Biennale Foundation for the opportunity to talk to you about one of my favorite things, perfume. And more importantly, to smell what we'll be talking about. Most of us go through life without the chance really to think about smells and what we're smelling. Smelling is often our least educated sense. And when we encounter it, it's often in a commercial setting where there's often pressure to buy, and often using vague descriptors by salespeople who know only marketing speak that they're taught, right? And today we'll be going into depth into one of these problematic labels, the Oriental. And in the first part, we will be learning about this perfume family, and we will smell some of the best examples of it. And then in the second part, as the title suggests, we'll be making a detour and looking a bit critically at this notion of the Orient in perfumery. I must warn you, this is a bit of a text-heavy presentation. I love text. Text is how I got into perfume, actually, but more on that a bit later. But it's also because I'd like you, while smelling, to read and think about what you are smelling. Okay. Yeah. So you'll be reading some beautifully written criticism about what you're experiencing. And then I'll help unpack it with you because sometimes it's dense or it has obscure references. So, ready to start? Okay. So before we go into the Oriental category, let's take a bit of a look at perfume classification in general. You see here two examples of fragrance wheels, which is the traditional way in which fragrance is usually classified. The one to the left is one of the oldest examples from 1911 by a German company called Drom. The one to the right is probably the most popular one these days. It's by Michael Edwards, originally from 1983, but we'll be getting back into that a bit later in the second part of the presentation. What I'd like you to note here is that there isn't one way to categorize fragrance. So the Drom wheel has 16 categories, as you can see, one of which is Oriental. It's that one in pink over there. Whereas the Edwards model has 14 categories, divided into 4 broad families that you can see on the outer wheel. So we have woody, fresh, floral notes, and then Oriental. So the Oriental here is a broader family divided into 4. We have floral, soft, woody, and plain old Oriental. Okay. So what is an Oriental perfume? Okay. Here we have 3 definitions from 3 different sources from the past quarter of a century. We have at the very left a book about perfume by National Geographic from 1998. And then in the middle, we have perfume criticism from a book from 2008 that you can actually see on the table. We'll be getting back to it. And then on the right, we have a definition from Perfume Society from last year. What I'd like you to notice is the change in language with time. So starting with the oldest one, the National Geographic, the book has no problem using some stereotypical descriptors, such as mysterious, sultry, uninhibited, exotic, and erotic. Okay? The middle one gives us a bit more of a technical definition, emphasis on amber, the oldest surviving example being Shalimar, which we will be smelling in a bit, and then divided into subcategories, as we saw in the last slide, and that you can see down in the wheel below. And then I added below that the definition of amber. So as fragrant resins, we'll be coming back to that in a bit, and we'll be smelling some examples of amber. So with a mention that it is traditional to the Middle East. So it's only in the most recent example from last year that we get any hint that there is a problem with this word Oriental. Okay? So it says, in recent times, it has become increasingly clear that this term is outdated and offensive to many. And we'll be getting back to that in the second part. Okay? So let me stop here a bit to tell you about the middle book from the previous slides. Now it's a family of books, and you can see two examples of it there. So it is a compilation of perfume criticism by a couple of critics called Luca Turin and Tania Sanchez. And they covered more than 1,800 perfumes, at least in the paperback edition, the smaller one that's over there. And it actually happens to be the book that got me into this rabbit hole of perfumery. At the time, I was living in Philadelphia. I was working as an architect, and then I came across this book in the bookstore, and it was like nothing I've encountered before. The language, the references. I've always loved perfume, but this book opened a door to me to a whole new world. At the time, it was emerging, which is the world of niche perfumery. Now it's booming. I was just this afternoon in the Perfume Expo here in Riyadh, and actually I discovered a whole other world of niche perfumery that is Arabian. So one kind of clarification I'd like to make here is that when we're going to be talking about Oriental, it's Oriental from a Western perspective. So these are all Western examples of perfumery. But we'll come back to this idea of perspective and the Orient and who's talking in a bit. So let's look at one of the features that I loved about this book is that it has these top 10 lists. Keep in mind with any kind of top 10 list that it is subjective. What I think is a great perfume, you may not think so. And both of these views are equally valid. But this is still a good entry point for anyone discovering a new world. So here you can see that they have the best feminines and masculines. They have the best feminines for men and masculines for women. Again, remember this idea that gender in perfume, as in a lot of cultural things, is just a construct. And then there are the main families. We will focus on Orientals in that, but there are also examples of the best quiet and loud fragrances, the best affordable and expensive ones, the best strange ones, that's my favorite category, and desert island lists. So, ready to check out the best Orientals? All right. Okay. So here, again, you see the definition that we saw before on the right of the Oriental, referencing Shalimar. And so, of course, we'll have to start with that. From this list that you see here, I picked 5 out of the 10. They have, you'll notice that they have 5 Guerlains. I just picked 1. It's clear that the critics have a bias towards Guerlain. Not that Guerlain isn't great. It's one of the best and oldest perfume houses. But I thought one example is representative. Same thing with Serge Lutan. There are 2, I picked 1 of them. And then there are 2 that are designer perfumes. You probably would be familiar with some of them. One of them is a blockbuster, Angel. And then I wanted to pick 2 from outside. These are 2 highly rated perfumes, but I felt that I needed to include I'Oud. And when talking about best Orientals in Riyadh, the whole list doesn't have a single Oud-focused perfume. So that's why that edition. And then the last one, it was actually my first niche purchase and first niche perfume love. And of course, you all know how first loves have a special place in our heart. And then later on, when I went to Zurich and did my master's, I met the perfumer, and it happened that he's a wonderful person, and we became friends. So we'll get to smell more of those later. I just wanted to tell you a bit more about amber, because amber is something that we'll be encountering again and again. So traditionally, it's a group of fragrant resins. Some come from the tree sap, the sticky stuff that comes out of the tree, but some come from flowers, like the Cistus labdanum. Okay? So let's start with Shalimar. We've mentioned it a couple of times now. I also want to tell you kind of a bit of a structure of this part. Yeah, we can start spraying them. And exactly. So I will have two kinds of slides for each one. The first one is from Fragrantica. It's an online perfume encyclopedia. And I want you to look at two kinds of information in it. First is this sort of, let me see, is there a pointer here? So these main accords, because I want you to start thinking about the descriptors. And if you could pass me also one of them, because I'd like to smell things as I'm talking about them. Thank you. Okay? And the other thing that we notice here, sorry for turning my back on you, is that the notes pyramid. Okay? The notes pyramid is a device by which we describe the lifetime of perfume. So the things that we smell at first are usually the top notes. So first you're smelling here the bergamot and floral notes. But usually most floral notes tend to be in the middle. Okay? And that's about, let's say, half an hour to an hour inside. And then later on, what we tend to smell are the base notes. And in this case, it's vanilla and tonka. But what the other part I want you to look at when reading this sort of deciphering the diagram are there. It's the main notes according to people's votes on Fragrantica, because we usually kind of the top three are what we really experience. Okay? Then the other thing that I told you about it being text-heavy, this is the entries for these perfumes from these books I mentioned. Okay? I'm not going to read everything, but I want you to smell, just to spend a bit of time with each perfume, because as we said, it's going to develop over time. If you have a pen with you, you could write on this what it is to revisit it later on. Okay? So as we saw in the previous slide, most people think of this as a vanilla and citrus perfume, or lemon. Okay? And this is kind of what it's described here. It's, as we said, it's the oldest surviving example of an Oriental perfume. It's from 1921. Obviously, it has changed a lot over the years. And one of the things, the ideas that is mentioned here that I'd like you to think about is that this idea of when we use a perfume, for when is it used? We talked about the perfume pyramid and the top, middle, and base notes. So here there is this example that this is not a perfume meant for the person who smells it immediately. So the person sitting next to, traditionally it's a feminine perfume, sitting next to the woman in the taxi, and it's not the perfume later on for the bedroom, let's say. This is the perfume for the middle, for the dinner table. It's quiet, but it's not too quiet. So it asserts its presence. It's not too loud, so it's overpowering. It has things like vanilla, so it goes well with food, and lemon. That's also a food thing, both things that we use in food. Okay. Did everyone get the chance to smell it? And if you want to still read the text, I can leave it for a bit more. But I want you kind of just to immerse yourself in the text. You don't have to read it like A to Z, even if you just scan through it, because I'm guessing most of you haven't experienced perfume criticism before. We've probably seen movie criticism, or TV series, or music criticism. But this is a new concept for most people, kind of thinking about perfume as another form of art. And this is part of what I want to bring to the table here. Okay? So the next one is a much newer blockbuster, and it's Angel by Thierry Mugler. So if I could... Okay. again, you'll see here that there are a lot more notes, right? The first thing kind of that we notice about it is that these things are not very accurate. This is probably truer to the original, to the what's in it, than the one from Guerlain was. Guerlain, I'm sure, the Shalimar, I mean, has a lot more notes than this, but these are the main ones, okay? Most perfumes actually have more this number of ingredients, okay? Even the ones that you see out in the installation, it's a simplistic thing, or some of the things in them are made from multiple things. Okay, I see some people are still starting to get it, the scent, so I'm gonna skip. So here kind of what we notice is that it's sweet and patchouli, warm, spicy. The main note there is patchouli. Patchouli is a kind of leaf, but it smells, it's like the smell of the 60s, the hippie movement. It's this sort of strong, and I like the description here, and I'd like you to spend more time with this. It's a big text, but I'll give you kind of the idea. The idea here is that in the main part, that when, so here when you see TS, it's by Tanya. So one is by Luca and one is by Tanya. The idea is that when she first smelled it, she thought that it's a joke. Okay, it reminded her of the Marshmallow Man from the Ghostbusters. I don't know if you remember that idea. And kind of the idea here, I like this idea of a joke in perfume, that the main idea of Angel is that it has feminine counterparts, which is this sweet cotton candy aspect. It's called ethyl maltol, there. But with it is this very masculine patchouli that we spoke about. Okay, and it's sort of bringing these two ideas. We spoke about like how masculine and feminine in the list, they can be interchanged. Masculines can be worn by women and vice versa. So this is the main idea of it, is that it brings something very feminine, which we think of traditionally sweet cotton candy things as feminine, and mixes it with patchouli. And it's sort of, there's some humor in that idea, okay? And it mentions there how it was so successful that so many people then tried this sort of combination. And it doesn't work as well as the original. And here they say, you know, buy the perverse, brilliant original, but wear it only if you know how to tell the joke properly. Okay? This idea of a joke in art, or humor in art also, sometimes we take art too seriously. And we don't realize that it's actually meant to be funny or, you know, provoke a smile, at least. I'm sorry, I'm going to rush through some of these just because I don't want it to delay. If you want some of the, I mean, they're in the book and you can find it digitally. But I'd like to move on to the next one. The next one is the other designer perfume. It's from Bulgari. It's called Black. It's probably one of the less known ones from Bulgari. Okay? Here we notice that the main note or descriptor is leather. And, sorry, I didn't. We also have vanilla, and we also have green tea there. But I'm going to jump again more quickly to the text, just to give you some time to read it, but also because I think the text is more representative. Often the notes that we get don't really tell us the full story. And here you notice they have always these two words, descriptors, and they neither mention leather nor vanilla or green tea. They mention hot rubber. Okay? So to tell you kind of the main idea of the text, we spoke about how Shalimar is a citrus amber perfume. Okay? And just in case your nose is starting to get tired because You probably know the coffee bean trick, but if you weren't in my workshop or you're not familiar with it, you actually have your own neutralizer on you, which is your own body. So if your nose is starting to get tired, just smell your own skin through the cloth, and that resets our nose. Okay? And if I can get, is that sprayed, please? Okay? This is kind of one of my favorite subtle ones. And what I like about it here, kind of the same way that we talked about Angel being, telling a joke, the idea here is that this is a smart perfume. Okay? What do we mean by a smart perfume? So we spoke about the binary accord, meaning an accord made of two things in Shalimar. So here we have this idea, the perfumer Annick Menardo added a third axis to it. So if we think of it, let me see. So we have the amber note, a big, solid, sweet amber note. We spoke about amber. You can kind of smell it. It's the sweeter part of it. We have a muted 50s Je Reviens floral note. Okay, Je Reviens is just another perfume. You don't need to know it to know what they are talking about. Okay, but then we have finally a bitter, powdery, fresh rubber accord. And I think this is kind of the one that makes it a smart perfume. Okay. And the nice thing about it is that it's very much in tune. So they talk about it here being, depending on how you smell it and when you smell it, and of course things such as temperature, if during the day, it could be either subdued or it could be really loud. Okay. And think as we're going through these about what makes them Oriental. So far, do they smell Oriental to you? Okay. So, well, I mean, that's the thing. That's part of the problem of Oriental, and we're going to come back to that, is that the definition of it is very not specific. Okay? So we get here, so this is kind of a novel and modern combination. And I like that last thing, that spending an evening with black, and you would know that its place is with the great emancipated fragrances of old time. Okay. And I like it because it's probably the most subtle example of what we're going to smell, and it's probably one of the least appreciated mainstream perfumes. Often people ask me kind of, what can you get that's not too expensive? And this is one of the my favorite ones. Let's go to Serge Lutan with La Mer. It's this one. It doesn't look like the original because that original is a bell jar, which means it doesn't spray, and it's a nightmare to transport. So I decanted in a small thing. But Mer, you probably know it as traditionally, it's supposedly one of the three gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus. And it's a substance that was used even before that in embalming. Okay, it's a spice, it's a resin, it's Oriental from the origin, from long before we were talking about Oriental perfumes. And again, I'm going to jump more quickly because I don't think this is as exciting as the description itself. So it's resinous aldehydic. Resin, as we said, myrrh itself is a resin. And aldehyde is a substance that probably for most people, we would know it mostly from detergents. It smells clean, but it's actually a substance that was made famous by Chanel No. 5 because it was the first perfume to use an overdose of it. So here, the entry talks about, if you're familiar with Serge Lutan does these typically very Middle Eastern perfumes. They tend to be heavy, and they tend to be kind of very full. This, by contrast, is actually, it's taking something like myrrh and then putting it with something that's very light and very bright, like an aldehyde, and making it sort of, I like this part, also their last sentences in these reviews are usually the best. La Mer has a, oops, sorry, wrong button. Goodness, I ruined the, okay. La Mer has a pure, clear, unearthly tone with beauty and force, as if the fragrance could sing a clean, high C as high as heaven and not show the strain. So this idea, think of a perfume as a soprano with an ability to sing a really high note. And this is sort of, this is the thing that got me into from this book into perfume. This reference to all these other art forms and references. Mm-hmm. Did everyone get the chance to smell La Mer? Okay. Next is niche perfume. Niche, as I mentioned kind of briefly before, it just means it's a perfume of limited distribution. They kind of started becoming popular around 2000, and now, you know, they're really popular. And this brand, for instance, got so popular that Estée Lauder bought it. So I don't know if we can still call them niche, but it's still limited distribution. So here you notice that it's called patchouli, but the first main descriptor is not patchouli, it's leather. Okay? And when we look at the notes, also the first thing that we notice is not patchouli, it's the end one, it's leather. It's actually not leather, it's birch. So let's talk a bit about leather here. And let me also just grab one before I go. Okay? So leather, most people think of it, you know, think of jackets and purses and that. But what we're actually smelling when we smell leather is not the smell of the skin itself. It's the smell of the treatment process, which comes from the birch tree. This is why. So we get tar from birch tree. It's called rectified birch tar. And that's what humans treat leather, you know, animal skin with for it to become leather. So let us go to this. And the descriptor is that it's a strange leather, okay? And the image here that he mentions is that it reminds him of a library, of the smell of decaying old books, okay? Because decaying old books bring up this phenolic conversation, which is, let's see, I mean, the writing itself. It's at once beguiling, salubrious, and toxic, okay? And fiercely intelligent, like a fiercely intelligent librarian, okay? Okay, it's not, I don't think it's an easy perfume. It's not like, you know, and this is the thing, often people think of perfume as something we put in order to attract others. And sometimes when you're in a bad mood, or say there is a pandemic going around, you might want to have perfume kind of to mark your own personal space. Like, I'm in a bad mood, stay away, okay? Or you're too close, you know, social separation. So sometimes, you know, we don't have to put something pretty or something inviting. And that's one of the things kind of that I like about these strange smells. Mm-hmm. Did everyone get the chance to smell it? All right. So next is, yeah, the bottle looks different, but, you know, as I said earlier, this is one of the two that I brought from outside the list of the best of, because I had to have a oud here. Yes, please, thank you. Okay. And this is probably one of my favorite ouds. This actually spilled a bit because, as you can see from the bottle, it doesn't have a cap. it just comes with this little pin. And I had to put it in the baggage from Beirut here because, I can't bring 7 bottles on the cabin with me. And then the bag, I was bringing them in, I put it out in the hotel room and it smelled like this all night long. So I've been thinking about that. But let's go to the description of it. Okay, and here you'll see 2 parts of it. A part by Luca Turin, and it's kind of straight what it says. Oud Queer Darabi is leather, oud leather of Arabia. Okay? And this is, I'm going to slow down a bit, just kind of, and maybe read at least the first part of it, is that together at last, oud and leather, 2 epic, battle-scarred, weather-beaten action heroes of perfumery on the same bill, okay? So kind of think of this like as a movie. One of the things I like about it is that it's not shy. It brings out the animalic aspects of leather and oud. They are both animalic. I mean, leather comes from animal skin that we treat with things, and oud, even though it's not actually an animal, or it doesn't come from an animal, it has animalic aspects. Oud, I mean, I'm probably sure that most of you here, since this is oud culture, are familiar where oud comes from. It's actually from the bark of a tree that has been infected by a kind of fungus. It's called the noble rot. And the tree produces this resin as a reaction to protect itself from the fungus. But the result is this kind of really strange smelling substance, but that is somehow really inviting at the same time. Okay? And there in Tanya's part, so sometimes you see if things have changed in formulation, they would have different, or an additional part about it. So this smells quite masculine, but she mentions, for instance, that this is the idea, the dry down of it is especially feminine. So if you want, wait on this until it's dried down a bit, and then you'll notice it's, these animalic aspects, the musk, tend to become kind of very intimate, a bit like a hug. Okay? And this is probably one of the nicest things about a perfume that's, at the first smell, it's a bit like, ooh, this is almost dirty. But then when you let it calm down, it's sort of one of the most attractive things about oud, is that it sort of has, that edge between pretty and dirty. Okay. And then the last but not least of the smelling part is l'air du désert marocain. So it means the air of a Moroccan desert. Okay. You'll notice again here that the most prominent note is amber, and we see it here in the descriptors. And then we have coriander, and we have cedar. But I'm going to skip to the criticism of it. So it's described here as incense oriental. Okay? And this is kind of as, spicy amber full force. One of the things, this is a big text, but I want to read a couple of things for you. So here, if, as Carlos Santana claimed in his Grammy acceptance speech, the angel Metatron delivers messages to the world via rock guitarist, it only makes sense that the as yet unnamed angel of perfume speaks through an unassuming Swiss chemist from Zurich with a mustache and a button shirt. Okay. Can I? Oh, I can smell this already in the air, but is there an extra one or? No, just leave it for yourself, yeah, please. Is there? Okay, right. Okay. And this is kind of one of my favorite sentences about it. One hail breath of Dessert's vast spaces clears the head of all the world's nonsense. And I love the fact that perfume is capable of doing that. So this review is written by Tanya Sanchez, and so she's saying that even though she isn't familiar with, Moroccan deserts, so that there is something about the ancient smell of these resins, styrax and frankincense in this case, that on first inhalation strikes even this suburban American Protestant with so many memories of Mass as entirely holy, beautiful, and purifying, lit without shadow from all sides. It's kind of described, this is one of the difficult things of talking about perfume. It's kind of, we have to resort to our other senses because we're used to, and in this case, we're talking about lighting, which is visual, okay? So, even without the fragrance's name to prompt me, I would still feel the same peace when smelling it that I felt only once before when driving across the southwestern desert one morning. All quiet, no human habitation for miles, and then to skip, wear this fragrance and feel the cloudless sky rush far away above you. Okay. So, we smelled some examples of what, at least in the West, is considered Oriental perfumes. Okay. Now the question is, and this is a question that started to emerge in recent years, is it time to rename this Oriental fragrance family? Okay. This is from an article of a blog called Bois de Jasmin. It also appeared, or actually originally it appeared in Financial Times magazine. And what it brings up is this idea of what I want to bring up here today, is that, is it okay to talk about Oriental? I mean, especially after, the world of perfume press releases in one in which Edward Said never wrote Orientalism. We'll see in the next slide, we'll talk a bit more about this idea of Orientalism. Okay, odalisques lounge in the incense-scented harems of marketers' imagination. So it's a very stereotypical view of what the East is. Okay, the Mughals are still ruling India, and the Arabian desert is a vast expanse of golden sands populated with handsome explorers, not an oil well in sight. So, and then there's even the fragrance family called Oriental. Now, one thing that she mentions here is that originally, actually, it wasn't called Oriental. Okay, it's a marketing word, not technical jargon. The original name in French was ambré, ambery. Okay, and we can see that in the next slide. This is the classifications. Oops. So we saw classifications that were like the wheel before. The French Society of Perfumers does this sort of more table variant. But you'll notice that it's called ambery here, okay, not Oriental. So let's talk a bit about Orientalism. And Orientalism was written by the Palestinian-American thinker, and it was mostly about literature. It was written in 1978, and it was the beginning of post-colonial studies. This idea that, a lot of what the Orient was, or conceived of, is just a conception that was constructed by the West. So here it started, actually, I have an excerpt from the introduction of it, because it starts in Beirut, where I just came from. At the time, it was the Beirut that was ruined by war. Now it's ruined by other things, corruption, etc. But it was the same idea that a French journalist was writing about Beirut at the time as if it's a thing that was lost to the West, without even considering that there are people living there, the Orientals, that were part of the place, that had a different take of the place. So this is the idea that I'm trying, and not just me, but we'll see in a bit, that a whole group of people are trying to bring to perfumery. So I brought a few different excerpts from articles about the subject. This is from Bazaar. It's called, Why Are We Still Describing Perfumes as Oriental? Okay. And it starts with, or at least the first excerpt is from Tanya Sanchez from the Perfume Guide, who is Asian, by the way. And the term in the US, at least, and we'll get back to that in a bit, it's as offensive to Middle Easterners as to Eastern Asians. So the idea is that Orient comes from East, but the East is always in reference to whom? And in this case, it's to France, because it's kind of the main origin country of modern perfumery. And it's loaded with post-colonial, France occupied a part of the Middle East, including Lebanon and Syria and Algeria and Morocco, etc. So the idea is, why are we using this as a reference? And notice, even when we talk about it in Arabic, when we talk about الشرق, why is it شرق? شرق لمين? Okay, it's east of the West. But then, so it is the idea that it's perfume now is a global product. So why don't we use something that is more of a global term? And we're going to get a bit into that. What do we use instead? So the problem with it is that its European culture has historically fetishized and sexualized Asian people and cultures. Okay? And that it's often played into a harmful fantasy. So one of the organizations recently that is taking a stand is the Fragrance Foundation. So recently, the group's president here describes the term as outdated and offensive. And we saw that kind of also in the Perfume Society earlier. But let's look at another article that brings that. So the great debate on Oriental fragrances. This is an article from Fashion that was by Madeleine Chung. Madeleine Chung, as you can probably tell from the last name, is Asian. And so in this sense, at least, she has a stance at the end. I'm going to just jump to the end. That she says, but now that I do, I'm avoiding all fragrances described with this term, no matter how good they smell. Okay, this is sort of the extreme example of it. I don't know if I would agree with her. Whatever they call themselves, if I like something, I'm still going to use it. But I did also want to bring some of the other perspective here. For instance, that some people would consider the term a compliment, that this is where these smells come from. And we as Middle Easterners should be proud of it. This is part of the heritage, whether it's stereotypical or not, and we should be, feel flattered that someone would reference such beautiful things to us. And that is a valid perspective, and we'll get back to that in the last slide. Okay. But what I also wanted to note out here is the silence of a lot of the companies on this subject matter. For instance, for this piece, neither Yves Saint Laurent nor Chanel wanted to comment. It's still developing. They don't know where to stand on the issue. The Middle East is a huge market. They don't want to offend anyone. This idea of a brand, we'll also get back to it in the last slide. Okay? And here there is a talk about the official terminology and being changed if pressure is applied. Okay? Sorry, this got stuck here. And this is I want to talk about the pressure. So this is a petition that was started actually not too long ago, during the summer of 2020. And it was started by a group of people in the perfume industry, mostly independent, some Middle Easterns, like Dan Al-Masri that I know, some Asian, some just people that feel offended because they feel that it's not right. And the idea is to decolonize scent. Okay, and it's a petition that I signed. It might be, let's say, extreme in some cases, but I don't think it actually is. Let's go to the next one just to talk about some of the. So these are some of the steps that they suggest here that people do to take action. So not just they encourage people not just to sign the petition, but to be courageous and hold the companies accountable and ensure adequate representation of BIPOC. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But why is it so wrong? Okay, and there are here 8 reasons that I think are rather compelling. So first is that they actually are not meaningful. You know, what does Floriental or Oriental mean in terms of smell? You know, even amber is an abstraction. We're talking about resins, but you know, why do we need that extra step of abstraction of Oriental? The second part, you know, that we already mentioned, is that they're outdated, derogatory, and offensive. The third thing is that it's also something that we saw in the articles before, that they were formed through the lens of colonialism, okay? And then the fourth is that the Orient is actually a really big region. So it includes Middle East, North Africa. They might be closely related because of Arabic culture, but then it also includes South Asia. I mean, and actual Oriental, like in the use in the US, it includes all of Asia, especially the southern part. And then the one after that is sort of related, is the global shift towards dismantling colonialism and the remnants of it. And then including BIPOC people of color, movement towards equitable representation. And actually in the US, there has been legislation that was passed to eliminate Oriental from the government documents, because until recently it was part of the documents. It meant more their Eastern Asian people rather than Middle Eastern people, but still it's offensive in either case. And then the last one is the rise of Asian hate crimes. All right. Now, so what do we use instead, the question, if we're not to use Oriental? So here there are a few different alternatives: amber, floor amber, spice, woody, resin, incense, gourmand. Some suggest using Arabic words such as mukhallat. Okay? Vamber is kind of vanilla and amber. And actually what happened after this petition is that Michael Edwards, the guy that we mentioned from the fragrance wheel, agreed to change, at least in the English version, the name of the category from Oriental to classified as amber. Okay? So in a sense, this is a small victory. But amber is still, Oriental is still quite, these are you will find a lot of the resources that I showed you, the articles here, that's also part of the. But I wanted to end with this. It's some excerpts by Arab women writers from a book about perfume and literature. And allow me to read the full slide, or we'll read it together. So there is no denying that in Western imagination, the combination of perfume and the Arab world evokes camel trains crossing the desert, sailing ships plowing through the seas laden with valuable, fragrant spices, to harems full of snow-white beauties enveloped in wafts of incense, 50 and fragrance vapors. Sorry, I think 50 is just a reference. In other words, a world that, if it ever existed, nowadays certainly has no right to do so. All right. In contrast to this sort of the politically correct perspective, I also wanted to introduce 2 quotes from 2 Arab women writers that beg to differ. Okay. The first one is from The Art of Forgetting by the Algerian-Lebanese writer Ahlam Mustaghanmi, and it says, "The most wonderful perfume remains the one mixed by Guerlain, and that bears his name. In the 1940s, he invented a perfume for one woman for one night, which he gave as a present to the woman he loved. That is a perfume without promises, without a future, without commitments, a perfume without memory. Like Shahrazad, its story comes to an end when the morning comes." And then the last quote is from The Flower of Indian Figs by Tunisian writers Alia Tabi'i. "No, I still use Rosha, and it is with Rosha that I want to be washed when I die. because that is how I want to appear before our Lord, signé, wearing a famous brand. So there is this tension of, from the West, even, Middle Easterners or Asian people in the West kind of bringing this pressure to be politically correct. But there is also this resistance that we embrace these brands, Some of us want to be buried in Rocha or Chanel or Dior or whatever, no matter what they call. But in the end, what I would like to invite you is, whatever it's called, do not let the name stop you from enjoying what you like. So call it what you want, but don't let it stop you from it. And thank you. Sure. Any questions? Or if you'd like to smell, reapply one of these, or try it on the skin, if you would like to browse through the book, through any of that, please feel free to do so.